Welcome, everybody. Glad you can make it to today's presentation. My name is Leah Biard. I'm a current director of the Mortgage Investment Association of BC and a co-chair of the Speakers Committee. Asian Heritage Month is celebrated during the month of May. The occasion honors Asian culture and the achievements of the Asian community across the world. This month-long occasion is not only about celebrating Asian culture in May, but supporting members of the community year-long. I would like to express our gratitude to today's sponsor, Van City. Van City's own Jody Chan will be joining us after Andy's presentation to participate in the Q&A portion of today's event. Now, introducing the star of the show, Andy Pham. Andy is the Vice President of Canadian Asset Management at Bentall Green Oak. He manages $2 billion in commercial mortgages in Western Canada. And previously, Andy worked in real estate valuation and consulting. Andy holds a BBA and from SFU and is an accredited real estate appraiser of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. Without further ado, Andy Pham.
Thanks, Leah, very much. And before I start with this event, I have to say it's been an absolute honor to continue my involvement with the MIABC. The board has displayed tremendous leadership by supporting this event. And also, just a nod to the type of work that we all do with numbers, here are some interesting Canadian information from StatsCan website. Almost half of the immigrant population in Canada was born in Asia. In 2016, 48.1% of all immigrants were born in Asia. That includes the Middle East. Asia has remained the top source continent for immigrants in recent years. From 2017 to 2019, 63.5% of newcomers to Canada were born in Asia, again, including the Middle East. This is a slightly higher proportion than that observed from 2011 to 2016, when 61.8% of newcomers to Canada were born in Asia. So in 2016, Asian countries accounted for 7 of the top 10 countries of birth of recent immigrants. They are the Philippines, India, China, Iran, Pakistan, Syria, and South Korea. According to StatsCan population projections, by 2036, immigrants born in Asia could represent between 55.7% and 57.9% of all immigrants. And now going into my presentation. So today's presentation dives into many themes as I share my journey from Vietnam, as I continue to live with the label of boat person. As you might already know, a boat person refers to the refugees who fled Vietnam, usually by boat or ship, following the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. So here's a quote from one of my favorite songs from the 1960s. It's from a group called The Animals. It goes like this: we gotta get out of this place if it's the last thing we ever do. We gotta get out of this place because, girl, there's a better life for me and you. And as you listen to today's presentation, I would like to challenge you with this thought. What would you do to reclaim hope and freedom if they were lost to you? Just laying out some historical context here. In the late 1800s, the countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia were colonized by France, and the area was known as Indochina. But by the 1930s, communism and ideals of independence began to take root in North Vietnam and led by Ho Chi Minh. By 1945, Ho Chi Minh declares independence from colonialism. And there was a period of conflict between the various players, namely the Soviet, China, US, and France, with the oppositions to independence. So moving forward to 1954, according to the Geneva Accord, it splits the country in half, drawing a line between North and South Vietnam. By 1959, Ho Chi Minh officially declares war on the US-backed South, and thus began over a decade of conflict. By the late 1960s, under pressure at home in the US, troops in Vietnam were beginning to downsize and being pulled out. By 1975, all the troops had withdrawn from Vietnam, and so that was the year the South fell. So unification of North and South Vietnam as a socialist Republic of Vietnam, 1976, and that thus marked the beginning of the official exodus of refugees from South Vietnam from the late 1970s to early 80s. Okay, so before we get into the whys, which are the reasons why Vietnamese people began leaving Vietnam en masse, I'm going to speak to you about North and South Vietnam at that time. So I'd like to remind you that this is not a political commentary, but a historical description of what it was like back then. Vietnamese people are very similar, possessing same genetic ethnic lineage, no matter where in Vietnam they lived. The only difference between the people of North Vietnam versus South Vietnam was essentially differences of ideals. Because the country was unified by North Vietnam, communist ideologies prevailed. Unfortunately, for those of South Vietnam who supported a parliamentary republic, or essentially a democratic nation who had resisted Northern ideologies, were viewed as a threat to the main doctrine post 1930, 1975. So those people's lives were about to get worse on many different levels. At the time, if you were a person who had any connections to South Vietnam, there was a dossier on you. It tracked not only what you or your family did in the past, but also what you are currently doing at present. The new regime was concerned with any revolutionary-minded people who might start any insurrections. Thus, to actively quell any inklings of such activities, any suspicious persons would be arrested and executed or sent to prison or re-education camps with no trial and have their assets seized. It's estimated that about 65,000 Vietnamese people of the former republic were executed after the end of the war. If you were a former officer in the South Vietnamese government, you lived in constant fear because you knew it would only be a matter of time before the new government arrested you. If you or your family were educated, if you or your family were educated, or of the upper strata of society, or got rich under the patronage of the United States, you too would also be targeted. So over 1 million people were sent to prison or re-education camp, where an approximate 165,000 died. Many of those re-education camps were harsh chain gangs conscripted for productive labor. Others were forced to endure indoctrination and forced confession through any means deemed necessary to achieve the desired results. Death from starvation and disease occurred frequently, as the hot tropics were unforgiving when prisoners were poorly nourished and received little or no medical attention. So the new regime's pro-activities extended to any children of former officers of Southern Vietnamese government. The futures of these people and their families to come would have been very, very bleak. There would have been no higher education, no equal opportunity for employment, and certainly no freedom of speech. For many years after the war, the economy of Vietnam was strained due to limited resources available. Since the main trading partners were other communist states at the time, the state-owned models proved to be ineffective to sustain the nation, and thus poverty was the reality of many. Mandatory military enrollment for young men was required, but the quality of life in the military was not that much better. So you can imagine that any opportunity of a better future to live in freedom was gone for many people of South Vietnam. The thinking was that a glimmer of hope, no matter how small, despite immeasurable risk and dangers unforeseen ahead, was preferable to dying slowly in a Vietnam that no longer existed for them. So slide 5 here shows images of one of two battle cruisers leaving Saigon on April 30th, 1975, with people clinging on for dear life on the left, many only jumping onto the ship at the last moments of departure. On the right is another image of the people on the ship itself. On page 6 are images of desperate people who tried to leave only to be caught up in human trafficking schemes. Many of these people did not survive. Slide 7 shows the typical boat used in the escapes. It was always packed beyond acceptable capacity with little or no room to move. River-worthy they were, but sea-worthy they were a bit questionable. So if you think back to slide 3, I'm not going to go back, but there was that famous helicopter picture. It was taken April 29, 1975, showing the CIA officers helping evacuees up a ladder onto an Air America helicopter. That address was reportedly 22 Ya Long Street in Saigon. The name has changed now. I'm not sure the building is still there. It was an apartment building at that time. And you can always Google it. It's very famous. Yeah, so on this slide, you can see about 2 million people fled from Indochina. The majority, 850,000 about, came from Vietnam, about over 600,000 from Cambodia, and about 350,000 from Laos. The resettled majority occurred between 1975 and 1979. And though the numbers decreased through the decades, it still continued until the mid-1990s. So here you can see that the countries that first took people were in the Southeast Asia area. I don't know if you can read the slide, but over 50% of the resettlement occurred in Malaysia and Hong Kong earlier on, though there were other countries as well, Thailand, the Philippines, Indonesia. The second wave of countries that accepted Vietnamese people were Western nations, with the most, about 54% going to the USA, and Canada and Australia a close second at 13 and 14% respectively. Some of the other countries were France, the UK, Germany. So here, the slide transversion translation didn't come out very well, but you can see that the other significant figures to note, these are numbers that are reported, but it could be more due to underreporting. So throughout the 70s and 80s, it's believed that over 1 million people were sent to re-education camps. As I mentioned before, about 165,000 were reportedly died. 400,000 people also perished by other means, such as starvation, execution, or illness. And for the people who left on boat, it was reported that about 30% death rate occurred. However, some estimates are at as up to 50%. So, hold on. So in reflecting on my family and my story about how I came to Vietnam, I believe that the hands of fate were already in motion before I was born. So on the left side are simply talking points, mainly for me, and on the right side is a geographical depiction of the journey, approximately 600 kilometers, according to Google Map. So the reason I believe I was destined to live outside of Vietnam was because of my dad, actually. He came of age during the beginning of the South Vietnamese Republic, and growing up as the first son of a senior bureaucrat of the old French colonial era. And actually, my grandfather spoke fluent French. Because of my dad's upbringing, colonial French, he really didn't like it at that time. When he was drafted in the military in his late 20s, given his education and aptitude, he was selected to go to Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas and Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, where he was provided with English and flight training. There he learned to pilot the trainer plane, the Cessna T-41, and then the fighter plane, the Douglas A-1 Skyrider. The A-1 Skyrider was a single-seat propeller attack aircraft that supported the military during the war. He spent over a year in the United States in 1969. When he came back from the US, he continued his education, becoming an architect, and met my mom. So my mom, who was 10 years his junior, was at that time just finishing her studies to be a teacher. She came from a family who made their fortune making and selling conical hats that you saw from slide number 5. Those hats have become synonymous with Vietnam. At that time, she wanted to get married and have children. So when she met my dad, who was then a military man in uniform, it was too much to resist. After the fall of Saigon, my father, married by then, had to lay low out of fear that his discovery would lead to arrest and the consequences of that. Thus, he had to pretend to be a normal person by selling cigarettes outside my aunt's house in Saigon. My mom's family had to stop their business, but luckily had amassed a small fortune by then. So when my dad was in America, he got a taste of North American life. He was exposed to American music and British rock. One band he was particularly fond of was the Animals, which I quoted earlier. Those lyrics pretty much summed up how he felt about the whole situation in Vietnam at the time. The song, as you may have guessed, was called We Gotta Get Out of This Place, and it debuted in 1965. So there it was, my dad, my family, which was my dad, mom, me, and we had to get out of Vietnam. So the cost for the escape out of Vietnam was approximately two gold bars per person. Each gold bar was about 37.5 grams, or in today's value, about 30,000 US dollars. So that's enough to live very, very well in Vietnam, but it wasn't enough to be free. The first attempt involved us heading out to the east of Vietnam towards the coast to Vũng Tàu village by the sea, where we waited for about a month before it got too dangerous with local police patrolling the area, since many people were trying to leave by that route as well. No one came to get us at that time to take us to the departing vessel. It became too dangerous to stay, so we had to return to Saigon. One of the things that was imposed at that time was a travel ban limiting locals from leaving immediate neighborhoods. So with each trip out, forged paperwork was needed, and that was just part of the cost. On the second attempt, we were up the Mekong Delta in Long Suong village. Again, we waited, but again, no one came to pick us up. And like the last time, it was too dangerous to stay there any longer, thus we had to return. So by the very early 1980s, my parents were out of money and out of options. No one planning any escape plans appeared to be dependable. My parents were leery of most everyone who spoke about leaving Vietnam. Thus, they felt they could not trust anyone. However, as luck would have it, my grandmother on my mom's side knew of a family friend with whom they did business and was planning an escape route out of Vinh Long village, also up the Mekong Delta. He had already paid for an escape for his sons and daughters a year before, and they were safely out of Vietnam by then. Now it was his and his wife's turn. My grandmother told my dad, but wanted to keep me in Vietnam with her. My parents simply said no. Either we, my mom, my dad, my mom, and me would go, or maybe my dad would only go. If he survived, he would sponsor my mom and me. In the end, my parents decided that we would all go. So after receiving my grandmother's blessing and 6 golds a bar effectively, since she paid for the trip. So around that time, only my dad's father knew and my mom's grandmother. My parents arranged for fake travel papers again beforehand and slipped out quietly saying goodbyes. Our arranged motorcycle rides came, and away we went due west over an hour away to a safe house, and where we spent the rest of the night waiting. At around midnight, we were told to head to a small boat on the waterway, to slowly and quietly paddle out towards the sea. We were told to head to a small boat on the water to see where we would be transported to our larger, though still relatively small boat that would eventually push its way to the area where the boat and the ocean met the furious estuaries. This was a particularly dangerous part of the early trip, since many of these types of boats had trouble getting out into the open seas and were caught by the local water patrols. The boat itself was similar to Slide 7, very crowded with one main motor and a spare smaller one. It had a main level and a lower level, and I was young and my memories were of darkness. On the open sea, with the water so deep, it was pitch black, not like the blue waters by the shore. At night, since fear of capture was real by local police or by Thai pirates, we traveled by very low light, if any, and food consisted of simply boiled rice, not very well done and often burnt. By about 3 a.m., our boat was chased by patrol boats, and there was a rush of whispers. Throughout the boat, the captain wanted to turn back in hopes of talking his way out of being imprisoned, or perhaps bribing the patrolman with the gold bars that he and my grandmother's friend had stashed, unknown to anyone at the time. Hidden on the boat, my dad heard at this lower level and quickly went on top and began to argue and persuade the captain not to turn back. No one would be spared. They would all take the gold anyways. He quickly surmised that the boat captain was not a real seafarer, but only a river boating experience, and only a hand compass to guide him. However, there were a few things that my dad knew, which he explained. One, going north would only lead to Cambodia, which was at the time in communist occupation, thus would only lead to death or worse. Or two, going straight west would eventually lead to encountering Thai pirates being off the coast of Thailand. The pirates would surely kill us and worse, take the gold. Now, going south would mean that we'd be too close to Vietnam and the mainland, and there would be risk of patrol ships and, of course, losing the gold. Therefore, the only way to ensure that we would avoid the Gulf of Thailand and cut a clean path towards Malaysia was heading to about 210 degrees at first, approximately southwest to clear from the views of the mainland, then head 180 degrees due south, hopefully to hit Malaysia. So we were on the boat for about 5 days and 4 nights. One night the storm blew the canopy right off. On another night there was another boat with lights in the distance, but the captain was afraid that it might have been pirates, so he stayed clear of them. The people felt cold, tired, hungry, and seasick, and hope was beginning to wear thin. On the 5th day, there were signs of coconut leaves in the water, then eventually sights and sounds of seabirds. There were then boats flying flags of various colors in the far distance, so it was a good sign that we were perhaps near some water routes. Slowly up in the distance emerged signs of green images. My dad and the captain were by then Chemir, and having escaped the first night from the patrols, they agreed to turn 240 degrees towards the greenery until they saw golden sands up ahead. The captain volunteered my dad to investigate, which he did, so he jumped off the boat and waded to shore. There he saw a man armed with a carabine, which according to my dad was a standard issue assault rifle used by the task force of the Malay Sea Patrol at that time, which was a relatively good sign since, one, they weren't Thai pirates, and two, they weren't Cambodian infantry. Even though when they first met, the man with the weapon snatched my dad's fancy kinetic watch as payment for his eventual reporting of the refugee boat. When everyone was on the beach, the commander of the task force asked my dad in English to count everybody. So in total, there were 84 people. There were 84 people aboard a 3.5 meter by 11.5 meter boat, and we had just crossed the sea between Vietnam and Malaysia. That night, with a motley and disheveled crew, we were sunburned, tired, and hungry, and we slept on the beach. And then the men of the task force came back and robbed everybody of their valuables, including the gold, though it was a fair price to pay to be alive. The task force contacted the Office of the United Nations High Commissions of Refugees stationed at Terengganu, an eastern state of Malaysia, which gave instructions to transport all of us to Pulau Bidam, or Bidam Island, which was by then a sizable refugee camp with an established Vietnamese community, approximately 79,000 at the time. So on Pulau Bidam, my father got work as an interpreter, working for the representative of the commissioner. He learned that as a former officer of the U.S. military, he had third class priority to go to the U.S. But there was a queue lasting almost a year. First class was for people with family in the U.S. He also knew that as a family with a young child, our chances of being selected by another country was very good, especially given that he and my mom were educated and proficient in English. Life on the island for me was pretty much playing by the beach and hiking up the mountainside. For my parents, however, it was just waiting for food, waiting for water, for showers, for news, for interviews, medical exams, and everybody was hoping to resettle. Life in the refugee camp was very, very difficult. In the end, after spending every last penny of about $100 USD that my parents were able to hide on their trip, Canada offered to sponsor our family. They interviewed my dad separately, but my mom, likely to see if their stories collaborated. My parents signed papers to repay the cost to the Canadian government for the flight. We were eventually transported to Kuala Lumpur for a more thorough medical examination before boarding the flight to Canada. On April 9th, 1980, my family escaped Vietnam by boat. And by June 16th, 1980, we arrived in Canada by plane. We were resettled with sponsorship of the Mennonite Church in a city called Proudest, a small town of about 13,000 people. And at that time, it was the third largest city in Manitoba, about 1 hour west from Winnipeg. I ended my speaking notes here with 60-degree separation to denote culture shock, one of which was coming from a region that was essentially plus 30 degrees Celsius to one with temperatures of minus 30 degrees Celsius. My parents paid for their flight after about 6 months of arriving in Canada and not in gold. So here, it's just a picture on the left is me and my mom outside of a church on the refugee island, and the flight from that island to Canada, Proudest was about 13,500 kilometers. So before I go into this slide, I'd just like to remind everybody that the refugee situation is still relevant and global today. People from Central America, the Middle East, and more recently Myanmar, are facing this. 4 things just to, hopefully provide, and hopefully it sticks with you, is the idea of hope, and that it is something that would keep you going. It kept us going when it was extremely difficult and you don't know what's going to happen. Another idea is resilience, which is essentially, the story is about the resilience, and it's about something that everybody has at varying degrees to overcome adversity. Another idea is awareness, and awareness is, I think, something to keep in mind, develop better, deeper connections with each other. And the last thing is empathy. So with deeper connections, I just hope that we can all be simply kinder to each other. So that's it. That's my presentation. And here's a picture of me and my dad in front of that same church on the island. And there's another quote from a famous song. And so with that, we'll go on to the next part.
Thank you for sharing your experiences with us today, Andy. They were very, very moving. I think I had to grab a box of Kleenex just because the extent that your family went through just to get to safety and for a better life was incredible. So thank you for sharing. I'd like to introduce Jody Chan. She's going to join us in the Q&A portion of today's event. And Jody is an experienced banker. She's with Van City. She's a banker with solid banking experience, specialized in commercial banking and real estate lending. She has worked for several financial institutions and currently manages a diverse commercial real estate portfolio at Van City. So thank you very much, Jody, for joining us. Well, let's begin. I'll put this question out to the both of you, and feel free to raise your hand and go first if you want. But what does Asian mean to you? Jody, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think being Asian in Canada means being different. So for me, I grew up in Macau. Macau is a small Portuguese colony in China. So I feel I was very fortunate to get a good education in Macau, and then came to Canada for my university study in UBC. So after living in Canada for the last 25 years, I feel I'm a proud Chinese Canadian. Being Asian means to me people who look like they're from Asia, such as from China, from Japan, from Korea, from Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, like from China. And sometimes I feel lots of Chinese people, Asian people look alike because we have yellow skin, we have black hair, but there are actually some myths and some stereotypes about Asian people. Asian people sometimes are seen as being submissive and hardworking. Asian people are sometimes being teased and not expect to react or complain. And if we complain or react, then they will treat us as being aggressive, rude, and impolite. And sometimes we are being mistaken as a maid, an assistant, or a babysitter. And me as an Asian woman, I feel like sometimes I'm seen as being a traditionally submissive, quiet, and nice, which had an impact on my career because that is not the quality of being a leader. So some people call Asians are the model minority. Asians are generally smart, hardworking, financially successful, academically outstanding, well-behaved, and law-abiding. But those are just myths. Asians are not good at everything. Not everyone are financially well-off. And I think that is a misconception. So for some Asian, if they believe in that model minority, they would have a sense of false.
Say anything to add to that, except maybe some from my experience. Being Asian just says that you come from a different history. You have a different story, and I think everybody has a certain story that led them to where they are now. No matter if you're Asian or any other race. Something that I truly believe and also documented by science is, and the study of human history is that everybody originated from Africa. And there was a great piece in the National Geographic magazine, maybe a few years ago, that traced every single possible face type, body type, hair, skin color type back to Africa. And you can find someone in Africa even today that that looks like you, like look at us here. I mean, I'm Asian looking, Jodie's Asian looking, Leah's Caucasian looking, but there is someone from some group in Africa that looks like us, and it's been documented. So being Asian just means you come from a different history and a different story, to my impression. And I just hope that everybody just keeps that in mind, no matter where you're from, originate.
That's great. Okay. I'll put this out to the both of you. What do you hope to see for the Asian community in the coming years? Andy, maybe I'll put that up.
Okay, thanks. With two people answering questions, it's either you go second or you go first. Within the coming years, I really would like to see more people of Asian heritage just being able to speak out more about their experience and being able to share their story with other people. I think creating awareness and an understanding of where I hope to be able to hear more stories from different people.
Yeah, that's great. Jodie, do you have anything you can add to that?
Yeah, so like Asian Canadians are the largest visible minority. We are 17% of the Canada's population, and it's projected that we would be, South Asians will be the largest group as a visible minority in Canada. So we have more Asian Canadian in Canada, and it's good to be more open and accept each other. And I want to see that our Asian community, we can collaborate more in the local community and also around the world. We can make this a better place, build our community, and shape history. And if we can embrace our culture, develop the multicultures, and understand the different race, then we can shine in our community and make this really a better community for all of us.
That's great. what Asian figure do you think more people should know about? You know, it's an odd question, but I think for every area of, or every industry, there's somebody that you can, you know, latch onto, that you feel that represents something. And so what figure, which person do you think, you know, more people should know about from your culture?
Well, I think now with the pandemic, everyone knows about Dr. Theresa Tam. She's Chinese, she's Asian Canadian, and she worked so hard to bring us through this pandemic, and with so many things changing, information changing, I think she does a great job of bringing us going through this pandemic.
So in Canada, April 30th is known as Journey to Freedom Day, and it actually marks the Vietnamese exodus of Vietnamese people who had to leave Vietnam. So April 30th was put forth by Senator Ngo, who is a Canadian senator of Vietnamese descent, and he actually put forth that I think it's a bill, and it was passed. So in terms of contributions to Canada, you know, for people of Vietnamese descent, especially both people, Senator Ngo, you know, that would be the person, and you can search it up, Journey to Freedom Day, April 30th, and recognized by the Canadian government.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. What is your favorite cultural tradition? Something that you can share with us that maybe the people who are attending this event, you know, maybe they can look up or seek out and experience for themselves too. What is one of your favorite cultural traditions?
My favorite is the Lunar New Year, because the Chinese New Year, the Lunar New Year festival.
Yep, like Jody, the Lunar New Year, and in Vietnamese it's called Tết, and if you say it, anglicize it, Tết or Tết. Anyways, it's essentially the same thing. You celebrate it in the spring over the same time period. It follows the lunar calendar. And when I was a kid, I always enjoyed getting lucky envelopes because it meant I got money inside of it. And then now I don't get lucky envelopes because you're too old and you're married. So that's no longer fun. But you get to enjoy all the great food, and you get to enjoy all the great festivities. And you know, Jody has been in Asia to celebrate it, I'm sure. And so if anybody gets a chance to celebrate it in Asia, it's way more festive than Christmas, because there's so many more people. So after COVID and after the pandemic, I think, you know, a trip to anywhere in Asia during that time period would be so much fun.
Yeah, it sounds phenomenal. I think everyone's looking forward for the pandemic to be over and experience things like this where we can, you know, get together again. So I'm going to shift to your careers. What is your proudest career accomplishment to date?
Wow.
Jody?
I will start. So I studied in UBC in finance, and after graduate with my BCom, it seems very natural to join banking. So I've been in the banking for the last 20 years. And for the last 10 years, I've been doing real estate financing. And I really enjoy doing the construction financing and doing a syndication loan, because I'm able to build housing for people. There's not enough housing units. So being involved in doing the construction financing, seeing all these high-rise condo units being built up is really amazing achievement.
Thank you.
Andy? So for me, I'm not gonna say this because of my affiliation with the MIABC, but I'm gonna say this from the perspective of a refugee immigrant kid who came over here, you know, at a very young age, and just wanted to get into work, into business, into a profession, doing something, you know, at doing something that frankly a lot of Vietnamese people could not do, because language or lack of opportunities. And it's basically, it is the, it's my involvement with the MIABC and with my, assuming of being the president, and being just recognized as, hey, you're now an industry professional. You can chit chat with that person, the other person about whatever it is. We can talk about the industry. You don't really have, you know enough to banter and maybe even to make up stuff if you don't really know it. But it's just that confidence and that support from an industry organization that that's behind you, that supports you. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud to represent both my community and also the industry and the MIABC, and that's very, very meaningful. From like my story, like from a kid that came from from Vietnam, and before the war, nobody knew what Vietnam was, right? So like here I am. So I'm very proud of that.
Thank you. That's great. Well, keeping in mind that it's 12:45 now, and everyone has a lot to do, I'd like to thank Andy for telling us your story. I really appreciate you spending the time to not only do that, but prepare slides and everything to give our audience a little bit of more background on why this month is important and how we can support our community better. And Jody, thank you to you for joining us on the Q&A portion. Thank you to Van City for sponsoring this event.